Hey guys, my name is Rye. Today I'm going to walk through how I did the plus 14 Priory on my Preservation Evoker. I think this key is probably one of the most requested healing keys that I've gotten. I think a lot of people have struggled from a tank and healing perspective in this key. I wanted to post one on Brewmaster, one on VDH, and one on Prez, but I think a good point to start is I'm going to post the one I did here in Prez. There were a couple mistakes in this key. I think there are a couple good learning points, but ultimately, overall, I was pretty happy with this key from a healing perspective. I think that your cadence in here is very important, and managing upfront healing is going to be your prerogative. In this first pull here, you're going to note that we do a pull into the first mini boss with a bunch of sharpshooters, and I'm going to show you guys the steps that you need to do to be able to handle some of these pulls. This is a very bleed heavy dungeon. There is a lot of spike damage, so that means you'll have to be healing a lot. And the way I treat this dungeon is that I'm always ramped. There aren't a lot of lulls in this dungeon where I want to take a break and want to take off the gas and stop healing. Always make sure that you have rolling reversions in here, and as well when you're fighting the trash up to the first boss, it's good to just keep Dream Breath on CD a lot of the time. There's a lot of kind of secondary and tertiary damage here from random sharp shots, bolts that might go off, and as well in this first pack a nasty bleed. You'll see that the bleed in this pull is either going to be dwarfed immediately by one of my team members or cauterized by me. I call that I want my mage to dwarf so I can save caut for the next one, and I'm using that to tip the scales fire breath in the pack. I am ramping immediately, as what's going to happen here is the guard Captain Solomon is going to do his thunderclap. Immediately when it does this thunderclap, I'm healing up with my echo, burn embrace, and then prepping my stasis with a full tip the scale Spiritbloom, as well as a dream breath. The whole point of this pack is you're going to keep healing rolling the entire time, and anytime that anybody drops here after a thunderclap or a disrupting shout, you want to release either your stasis, go for the rewind, or go for the Emerald Communion. You should be upfront healing everything in this pull and spending as much as you can to make sure that your team can stay alive until the Knight Captain is dead. For each one of these thunderclaps, it is also good practice that you immediately do press something like Emerald Communion, get your life bite ramp off, or keep people topped. Even on 14, it can be really deadly that you might just lose a team member here to a shot or some sort of combo or overlap onto this pull. I am playing with a blood DK, so I don't really have to do a lot of tank healing, but I occasionally do throw a golden hour on him. Obviously, most of you will probably know Yoda. He's a very good tank, and I don't have to worry about him too much, but some of these pulls in here can still be quite deadly. One tip is that on the archers, that the pot shot can occasionally just kind of hit you. You kind of want to be behind them, but they will jump to the person that's in melee range. So if everybody baits the pot shots within melee, all these sharpshooters are going to be jumping close to melee, and it'll be really easy to handle them. When they're stacked, your DPS are going to kill them faster, and kind of as an added bonus, everybody's going to be in your Dream Breath. This mini boss has a really cool trick to it, and you're going to notice here whenever he does Lunging Strike that you can actually jump out of it or blink out of it. You'll see that a couple times. I do some pretty clever warps here, and immediately as he's casting Lunging Strike, I would always recommend that just kind of pre-moving. Kind of your prerogative here as a healer is making sure that if the DPS do get the bleed that they're topped, but you want to kind of avoid it bleeds at all cases and scenarios. Again, whenever I'm fighting archers or any of these bulls, you can see that I'm always rolling hots on everybody. I'm casting Spiritblooms a ton. I'm jumping around on this mini boss specifically due to the fact of the bleed going out, and I'm making sure I can kick where I can. This pull was a little bit demonic here, as we did pull in 2 sets of casters, and we don't have a boomkin or a VDH, so it's a little bit more difficult for us to handle these pulls without the appropriate use of crowd control. So at some points I do kind of get in here, I press ignore where I can, but I think we actually have one death at the start of this key that happens here in this pull, and it's eventually we just run out of steam. You can see that we don't really have too much left for stops. All we have is Blast Wave and Sleet. Blast Wave is used there, and I think we use I use my push, and now all these kicks are going off in chain. I do manage to get a TD on him, which does save him from the double cast. However, we do eventually have him go down here again. Again, number one rule, try to keep echoes out on whoever you can on these pulls, verdant a lot, and you're gonna have a good time. I did pick up our tier set since the last video, and I'm pretty much geared now at 660 item level. I found a massive power spike in my survivability as well as my output and my HPS with this gear on. I'm currently geared around 20% haste, and I think I'm going to try to get up to 25 or 27, and I have about 66% mastery. The force set for Prez is insane for keys. It does allow us to get a shortened cooldown on Burn Embrace, which means that you're going to be life binding a lot more. So you're going to see I do a ton of combos and put out tons of Echo, 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 Burn Embrace, Spiritbloom, and then roll my regular stasis combo. Echo, Echo, Echo. And you can see here I get hit by a trap. And if you ever do get hit by a trap in any of these pulls, make sure that you pop something big like a defensive, or you're going to be in a lot of danger. When fighting a knight, remember your rule of thumb is always you want to cauterize person with a bleed if you can, and if you can't, make sure that you're babysitting them with rescue, time dilation, or other healing. About 20 seconds in the knight pull, he's always going to do a disrupting shout. This can be reduced in damage by Zephyr, and I recommend that if you have the dot on you, keeping Renewing Blaze for the bleed if you can't cauterize. Because this knight happens about 4.5 minutes into the dungeon on our route, I know that I always have Emerald Communion back in this pack, which means that if I needed to use it there for the knight overlap to keep somebody alive, I could. And now just be using something simple like Echo, 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 Burn Embrace, and then Emerald Communion. We do elect to pull all this trash up here with the mini boss. I'm personally a big fan of this pull, as it's the exact same pull I do on my Vengeance Demon Hunter. So I've done this key already on this level. I think that one thing to note is that, tanking this pull can be really, tricky for aggro, given that there's a ton of mobs. But more importantly, you're going to be fighting a mob with a reflective shield. There's going to be pot shots, and there's going to be a lot of tertiary damage here. So you can see that I'm ramping kind of with everything here, but our priest goes down to threat. When fighting the shield, and every time a shield comes out, you should always have echoes out on your team, Burn Embrace, and go into Spiritbloom or Dream Breath. The problem is that melee classes that are hitting the shield are going to take a lot of damage really quickly, so you want to make sure that they have a ton of healing available to them to make sure that they're topped and they don't fall over. You can see, here we go, we're kind of fully ramping here, we're waiting for our priest to get battle resed, and we're taking our time to make sure that we can get through this pull. The shield is out, and my DPS do get res, but I was a little behind on healing at that point. I queue a big Spiritbloom, and I'm back to be able to just queue in some Disintegrates, Fire Breaths, and Living Flames on the mobs. Whenever you have a chance to, when you're fighting these footmen, make sure you use Tail Whip or Wing Buffet or something kind of to desync them. The defend does reduce the damage of all mobs within their radius by 25% per, so if you have a bunch of them stacked up, the pack's just never going to die. As you can see, the reflective shield goes out there. I do already have a ramp going. I canceled my Spiritbloom because I was a little bit late, rescue my priest, and we go off to the next pull. This dungeon is very mana intensive because you're always going to be healing non-stop. Unfortunately, I didn't have an HPS meter up on the right, but you can see just by my party frames how much damage we're actually taking. Every pull has a lot of upfront damage and route damage just because of casts, sharp shots, and some of the mini boss effects. In the first mini boss, you have to deal with Thunderclap. In the second one, a bleed, as well as some sharpshooters. And the last one, this one here, you're going to have to deal with bolts, and if you fight trash on top of it, you're going to have to deal with other tertiary damage as well. Doing this dungeon with a VDH is a lot easier with chains, but however DK is a nice added touch as he can death grip in mobs that jump out. I would say on a difficulty level this is probably the harder, or one of the harder healing keys this season. However, Prez is the cheat code. I think this has got to be Prez's best dungeon, if not one of them. As you're going to see after first boss, we have an amazing toolkit to deal with as many paladins as we like at any time. I'm pretty confident that after doing it once, I was able to heal the lust pool of the entire room of paladins on a +13, and I think I could also do it on a 14 if I needed so, just because that they cannot all queue at the same time. So if you guys remember back to Vortex Pinnacle, when you're pulling these paladins, it's impossible for their spell queue to go off and have 2 Divine Tolls at the same time, meaning that they're always going to queue one after the other. Prez, having the toolkit it does with Lifebind, is exceptional being able to heal these paladins, and I think you're going to have a pretty good time with it. This boss, you also do have a cheat code, which is very, very helpful for your tank, and if you played with a prop paladin here, then you know that they get absolutely smoked. Cauterize is a lifesaver for your tank on this very hard-hitting boss. I would communicate with your tank, or if you're just in a pug, just slam it on cooldown. I think your tank will be pretty happy with the reduced damage. I would recommend though that this is a good time where you should start considering tracking your tank's defensives. If your tank doesn't have any defensives up, using a cauterize could actually save them and this entire fight. Personally, coming from a VDH, I don't really need much self-sustain, but having played with a prop paladin and being a prop paladin player a little bit, I know that this fight absolutely tanks. Kind of your goal is on this fight is alternating your healing cooldowns throughout each phase, wanting to end the fight with stasis and tip the scales available for the pull after this boss, as we are lusting it. As you can see here, Holy Radiance comes out. I release my stasis a little bit early just because it's on a timer. This boss is really awkward for stasis because if you finish stasis on the first Holy Radiance cast, then you're going to have a really tough time. Our mage doesn't pop anything and dies instantly there to the leap, which was kind of unfortunate, even though he had a bunch of buttons up. So we could have pressed something there, but we are waiting to get him up in 15 seconds. Again, make sure you're dispelling your tank often here when they get the judgment on them. If you're playing with the VDH, again, it doesn't matter too much, but you should be tracking Brand, Metamorphosis, and Feldev. If you're playing with a DK, they can AMS the application of the judgment. And as you can see here, there is this leap overlap that happens about a minute 15 to the fight, where the dog will actually jump on a player during the AoE. That did so happen that it lined up on our Shadow Priest, which is one of our squishiest players. I do try to save Emerald Communion for that lineup every time. If you ever have Holy Radiance going out and a Savage Maul from the boss, then you should make sure that you either have Time Dilate, Rescue, or a big healing cooldown ready. As you can see, for every one of these Holy Radiances, I'm either alternating Renewing Blaze or Scales, or pressing something like Emerald Communion. Even if you don't think it's a lot of damage, this Holy Radiance cast is 8 seconds, which I've shared about before, is a really long time for Prez to be able to heal Rot. Usually about 6 to 8 seconds is kind of our sweet spot in being able to have a lifeline window and get a couple globals out, but Holy Radiance is just long enough that it feels a little bit awkward, like okay pacing, but you should be able to pop something for it every time. Zephyr does work on this mechanic, and you should make sure you're pressing something to make sure to not die. Savage Mauls are also great for Echo into the Golden Hour effect, and you're going to see here that right before this boss ends, we do a final life bind, and we're off into the Lust Bowl, the dungeon. This bowl is a bunch of paladins, but you're going to see it's not too much of an issue for Prez. I did desync there, and I no longer have tip to scales in this fight. I'm trying to get Time Dilate on my tank as well before we kind of get grouped together here, and we end up lusting this pool. As you're going to see, I echo, echo, echo. And then our first Divine Toll's coming out here. I go into Lifebind, and for this next toll, I Spiritbloom. I put out TA, and for this next toll, I use my Dream Breath. Our rogue does get hit by a cast right before I finish my cast there, and almost does go down, but it doesn't really matter too much. I do hit Rewind just to kind of stabilize ourselves, but I don't think we actually need it, and I still have my entire stasis stored for these Divine Tolls. Echo, 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 Verdant Embrace, Release Stasis, Spiritbloom, and as well here, if I really needed to, I could go do another Lifebind ramp and we'd be completely okay. This is also a great time that if you find you fall behind and you need to get a Lifebind ramp kind of going, you can also use that Lifebind into a health pot window. So that's Lifebind with Echo, 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 Verdant Embrace, and then slam a health pot, and it can easily cover your entire team for Divine Toll. Remember, Zephyr also does work on these tolls, and you should be trying to use Obsidian Scales early. Especially at the start of these pulls, a lot of paladins, as you're kind of getting your healing ramped, or when you're not using a stasis, it's good to rotate these buttons. One other thing to really important note is Hover DR does work excellent on these packs, meaning that right before a Divine Toll every single time, you can press Hover and get a 20% DR. I did use Tip to Scales in this Paladin pack. I am ramped pretty easily here, and I'm saying that we can pull a little bit more. I'm getting ready to use my Verdant Embrace to this Lifebind, and I go into a big Spiritbloom for the first Divine Toll as there's a bunch of casts going out. And as well, I'm using Communion there, but I did make a big mistake. As some of you know, I should not have pressed Communion, but I used it as a panic button to make sure that I had a little bit of residual healing and I didn't go down this pack. Communion ideally is used with Echo, 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 Verdant Embrace, but I did use it there dry, which means that it did help me live, but it didn't really help my team much, as the only healing that they're going to get from it is the residual after healing of the healing that I don't need. I do commit Wing Buffet there to make sure my team's topped, and I see that cast going through on me, so I do finish my Spiritbloom a little bit early. And as you can see now in my stasis, I only have a 2-charge Spiritbloom as opposed to a regular case where I'd have a 4. That's because I wanted to commit that Spiritbloom to keep myself alive. Even with the stasis release, it should be more than enough to top a Paladin, as long as I'm using a Lifebind combo, and I should be more than okay. I Lifebind, I release that stasis, my team is topped, and here comes another Divine Toll, prepping my Spiritbloom, and my team is topped again. On Tuesday, when we get buffs, this is going to be a hell of a lot easier, as it already is. I think that Prez is exceptionally good in this ski, but now that we're getting a 20% Spiritbloom buff, it's going to be exceptionally strong. Remember that as Chronowarden 2, you get a hot from the 30% of the value of your Spiritbloom after you cast it on your party, meaning that your rot healing kind of recovery is going to be insane. As you can see, every single time for these Divine Tolls, it lines up almost perfectly that I get my Spiritbloom back. If you have a big pull in here with multiple Paladins, multiple casters, remember that your Fire Breath can also cover an entire damage event very easily, meaning that if you do need to Fire Breath to go and get a little bit of recovery healing, you can, and use those Leaping Flames to help your party. They have nerfed Baron quite substantially since, the first week of keys. I did this on a 10 the first week, which was like very, very, very hard because of this boss's spell queuing, but now it's pretty easy. He's always going to do hammers. Sometimes he skips a shield, and then he'll do a soak. You always want to make sure that you're following his spell queuing to not early prep healing too much. If he does, you want to wait for his Castigator shields first, pop a light defensive, get your team topped, and then have your team soaked. Ideally, you have a little bit of healing out just to cover that damage, and if you get the Castigator shield and soak at the same time, you're going to need a big defensive. Otherwise, the kind of healing you need to do is just carrying over the rot from exploding the shield, and if your team has multiple debuffs. If you do have a DK, a rogue, or a paladin in this fight, as well as a mage with ice block or any other immunities, you can actually solo soak these orbs. So you're going to see here that our rogue goes in and takes a bunch. I'm healing him, he takes 1, 2, 3, and then he takes 1 more and hits Cloak of Shadows. The way that this fight works is the Paladin occasionally gets wings. Kinda like your Ret Paladins you see in some of your keys that are hitting Divine Storm off cooldown and not hitting the Proud target. This guy's actually going to hit wings and hit you guys with 5 soaks instead of 3. This is a lot more of a healing requirement, and if you don't have an immunity class, I do think it's a little bit harder, but it's completely manageable. Just remember to look at your DBM timeline or your big wigs to make sure that you're not soaking before Castigator shield. The only way that you could die in this fight, just like right here, is if we were to have soaked before the Castigator shield. You should have tons of healing cooldowns available if you need, with Rewind, Emerald Communion, and Stasis. I recommend that if you are going to have multiple people soak them, they do them one at a time, and if you are choosing to soak them as a Preservation Evoker, that you do pop Obsidian Scales and Marine Blaze. Otherwise, you won't need these buttons in this fight, so I think that the best time to use them is on that shield soak. Remember, Castigator shield does not really do much, and so I wouldn't be too worried until we get to a key level where it one-shots. Even then, as playing Chronowarden, using Warp a second before the cast is going to allow you to take 20% reduced damage from the Castigator shield and basically always be immortal. As you can see, I ramped my stasis expecting us to get a Castigator shield, but we didn't get it, and now all I'm doing is releasing my stasis if I need to for the soaks, but we're more than okay. Castigator shield comes out, and as you can see, it barely takes my team low. I do commit Tip the Scales there, which in hindsight I actually think is a pretty bad play. What I've actually been trying to do a lot more in these keys, and if you've been watching my stream, I've been trying to sync Tip the Scales with my DPS cooldowns, ideally like Power Infusion or Deathmark, as I've been playing with Chain and Isis quite a bit. Kind of the idea is putting out Threads of Fate from your talent option actually ends up being quite a bit of damage. It ends up being, 1 to 1.5 or even as high as 2% of some of my DPS players' damage. Over the course of a key, that's a lot more than you can almost contribute as a healer, and it's almost giving like a raid buff in a weird sense. Although it's not as strong, it's something, and you should be cognizant that if you're going into higher keys, you want to do everything you can to speed up the key. Again, this pack is 2 Paladins, so I'm setting up my stasis here in a second when it comes up, but right now I'm just doing my regular Lifebind ramp to cover these Divine Tolls. I am watching to see if I need to time dilate or rescue my team members, and I do hit TD on my priest. I'm looking to kick, I'm looking to stop, and making sure that no casts ever go off during these Divine Tolls. Divine Toll's coming out, so I'm prepping with Echo, 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 Burden Embrace, Spiritbloom. Second Toll comes out, release a big Dream Breath, my team is stopped. I think that if you're doing this routine when fighting 2 Paladins, you're never ever going to struggle, and people are going to think you're a god. I think every time I've done Priory as Prez, people think that, you know, it's just an insane class, and it's because of that timing, right? When dealing with 2, 3, 4, 5 Paladins, we have a toolkit all the way up until 6 to be able to handle them very easily. Just because of the way our 3 empowers work on a ton of mobs, stasis, and lifebind with our tier set. This is an exceptionally hard pull, and I think we have a death here. So what happens is we're actually fighting a light spawn and a paladin. Oh wait, this is not, yeah, here it is. So the problem is that when you're fighting a light spawn and a paladin or multiple paladins, you're going to have that overlap of the light spawn channel on top of the paladin Divine Toll. Why that's really deadly is if that person is not topped or they do not have a heavy defensive, they are just going to die in that global. I do commit Zephyr for the next set of Paladin Divine Tolls here. I lifebind if I can, and all I'm doing is hitting Emerald Communion. The reason why is if anybody gets blitzed here by the Purification on top of a Paladin AoE, they're just going to die. I try to Spiritbloom max rank even if it's on myself late, just in case there's other damage that goes on. As these footmen also explode, dealing a little bit of AoE, we have to be very careful as this pack dies. We do beat the last Divine Toll on this pack, and now we're going into the right pack here with another Light Spawn. Remember, when fighting a Light Spawn, it's really easy to follow the combo of Echo into Reversion, and if you need more time, make sure that you're using that one shard of Spiritbloom, Burn Embrace, Echo Burn Embrace, or just life binding off yourself if you're scared about positioning. This is a double Light Spawn pack, so there's a ton of healing going on here, and I get a little bit worried. I end up pushing the mobs, which does end up kind of cooking us here in a second, as you're going to see. Ideally here we LOS the casts, but what can happen here is I get bolted into Purify, and I'm just dead instantly. We end up rezzing me here, but I think that this is almost kind of a legal pull. I'm not really sure how I feel about it yet. I personally wouldn't have done this if I'm tanking, but playing double light spawn, you just have the chance that if you don't have kicks locked down completely, that you're just going to go down. So a good chance, like a good thing to do with these pulls is either LOS them or make sure their kicks are under control. We did have good classes that could deal with light spawns with Invis and etc., but it's not the end of the world. We did manage to get me up, and we're back to being able to blast the key. One funny note you're going to see in this dungeon is we actually forget count. Not a lot, but enough that at the end of the dungeon we have to run and get one more mob. Although we have a ton of time right now, we kind of burned down our time, and this timer doesn't look as beautiful as it does at this very moment. Remember, when you're fighting the Risen Footmen or Mages, they explode at the end of the pack, dealing a little bit of damage, so make sure that you're ready for it with some Echoes out there, and this is a great time to use that Echo Golden Hour effect for some free healing on your team. One thing to note too, and I didn't really talk about this before, but I did pick up Signa the Priory, which is a 2-minute trinket actually off the last boss of this dungeon. I end up macroing it to tip the scales, as it does give me a metric ton of haste right now. At the time, it was actually giving me a little bit more mastery, as you know, I still have the 658 ring from the island on. Our rogue does die there to a swirly, which is kind of funny, but all good. I think it's pretty good. I think that there are probably better trinket options, but the two I've elected to use at the moment are the Signa the Priory, just to link with Tip the Scales, as it's a ton of damage or healing, and as well I have on the Simp trinket from Rookery, which gives my party 10k main stat. We're fighting these footmen very slow, and I'm trying to call if we can get maybe a stun or something, but our group is very like stun light other than kidney. So these are going to explode, and we're going to go into the mini-boss here. I've had healers of my own fail me on this mini-boss, and I'm going to show you the trick on Prez. But it's like any rot fight, make sure that you start this with Tip the Scales and Stasis. Lifebind immediately, Stasis, Spiritbloom, TA, Dream Breath. Once that's going, you can Echo, Burn Embrace on cooldown where your team's dropping a bit, and you're going to see my team's health just doesn't move at all. I would recommend here rotating Obsidian Scales, Zephyr, and Renewing Blaze if needed, and making sure you have substantial healing here for the end. I hold on to releasing my stasis for a very long time, and the reason why is I want my first Dream Breath to fall before I have to redo it. I want to let my team drop as low as possible so I get the max value out of my stasis. I life bind again. I'm big Dream Breathing here. I'm echoing, and I'm going into a big Spirit Bloom, and I Zephyr to make sure that our team doesn't die to the overlap. Hollow does die to a bolt there. Unfortunately, we didn't get any stops or kicks. I was one of the kicks available. This was a mistake that I made, but also I was trying to make sure that our team just didn't die to healing, so... I think that was the last death in this dungeon. The rest of this goes pretty smooth, but again, remember that we're going to be a little bit short count at the end of this, and it's quite entertaining to see us have to run back through the dungeon. Again, if you have stasis and tip the scales going into that mini boss, you don't need lust. I think it's more than enough. I think we had death mark on that pull and PI, but all that matters is you have some DPS cooldowns. If you feel like you need to lust it, communicate that with your team. I think lust is better used on the last boss, but lusting that mini boss could be quite value if your tank is low, if you don't have any healing CDs, and you're pressed for time. Remember that what matters most is that your team stays alive. So if you need to lust for healing, you know, communicate that, and your team, like if they tell you otherwise, just tell them to shut up. Like, you know, I know DPS players, I'm a DPS player, I love doing big numbers, but like, what's the point in timing a key if you can't actually make the requirement, right? Like, if you mess up somewhere, which is completely natural, we're all human, we're not, you know, Kira or, you know, Yoda or whoever else that, you know, plays at a very, very exceptionally high level, so even those guys make mistakes. So if you think you need to lust it, like we had that chat, do we need to lust the mini boss? I said no, but make sure that you trust yourself and you trust your own healing capabilities as well. Again, these ads are exploding. We pop AMZ here, and I'm trying to save tip to scales for the boss. I am trying to sync my tip to scales with my DPS CDs so we can do a bunch of healing and DPS at the gate. This boss is actually kind of hard, I think. Maybe not entirely. I think Prez also is a really good toolkit for it. So anytime he does one of his turnaways, he's going to do a blast of damage, and as well, he's going to do this inner fire, which is that pulsing kind of fire damage throughout the fight. You'll see in this first phase, I'm basically just running around here, hitting Living Flame, kiting this beam, echo, 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 and as soon as he like turns around here in a second, I use that tip to scales, I use my TA, my Dream Breath, and I'm blasting the boss again. Anytime that we have to face away, you're going to see that I turn around and cast a big Spirit Bloom after Lifebind. This is also the time which you should be using Obsidian Scales as you need, or Zephyr, because that's when the AoE damage in this fight is going to go out. Purify cast goes out, light ticking damage online, big Spirit Bloom here for the AoE damage, and you can see that it takes me pretty low. I did commit Obsidian Scales, and I could commit Hover DR if I needed to, and I think it's more than fine that you should be able to live this. I do like to save Rewind, and like to use Emerald Communion up top. This phase you should be more than fine by just committing stasis if you need to. Echo, 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 Spirit Bloom, and that Lifebind effect. The beautiful thing about pressing this fight is you're going to get 2 ticks, if not 3 ticks or multiple more of damage due to Lifebind. So once you press the button, you're going to get that initial hit of that Verdant Embrace, all the kind of trickle healing that comes in, and that big Spirit Bloom and Chrono Flame. So since those are going to be multiple heals over the fractions of a couple seconds, it's going to look like it heals multiple times, which it does. So it's really good in a fight like this where you're taking, like, you get ticked down a little bit, you get ticked down a lot all at the same time, and it kind of handles a little bit of the rot damage. My team kind of took off here because we had really bad spell queuing on our timing, but that's okay. I do manage to get a big Dream Breath going on up here to kind of top our team. Our mage somehow misses that. I don't really understand how that axes work, but he's more than fine, so I tell him to commit Mass Barrier, and I go ahead and landslide these mobs. I do have a pretty big stasis here that I release, and I know won't need it for the next part of this fight. As my team is stopped, and now we're kind of recovered, you can see my mana is also pretty low. I'm not really worried though, as we are in Bloodlust, I have Emerald Communion, and I have Rewind available to me if I need the healing. I kind of wanted to make sure that as soon as we noticed that we are kind of, you know, short count, as you can see now in the top right hand corner, we're at 99.48, we missed a sharpshooter. You know, I wanted to make sure that we could just rush in a boss and have enough time to complete the key. Like I said, this is kind of a funny ending, as you're going to see us like run through the dungeon, I'm like rescuing. But as you can see, anytime we have to turn around, like there I used Tip the Scales, always make sure that you have a defensive and a healing ramp going. you want to make sure that this healing is kind of covers that your team isn't just ticking down and dying. Again, anytime you want tip the scales, you want stasis, release, Emerald Communion, or rewind. This is an odd rewind boss as it doesn't do enough like kind of ticking damage to warrant it being very powerful, but as you can see, I echo, 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 burn, embrace, lifebind, and for that explosion, I end up using Emerald Communion. Emerald Communion is a great choice too when you have the beam on you and you have to move, as it's going to give you a ton of mobility and agency to move around your character. At this point, the boss is dead, we've finished all the hard trash, there have been no real problems, just a couple of deaths due to kicks and aggro, but nothing that was actually in my control. I think only the one was just due to my kick. This key is kind of the Wild West, you can have a bunch of things go wrong. As you saw me when I died, I got bolted during Purify because we ran out of kicks, so make sure that you communicate with your team what you're able to do. It's impossible as any healer class to heal through certain things if you don't have the right utility from your team or your team helping you. But at this point, we're running back through the dungeon and figuring out what we missed. Our tank's a little confused and he goes, I think it's a sharpshooter. And so we want to make sure that we go find the quickest pack that we can to be able to get up there. I already rescued, and now we're waiting for our slow priest and our slow mage to get through to the start of the dungeon. With all that being said, this is kind of the conclusion of the video. We timed the key, and I had a really good time in here. I think Prez slams this dungeon. It's probably like my favorite key to heal right now. Now that I've done every key on a 14, as well as a bunch of keys on 15, I think that this one feels the most rewarding from a healer's perspective. I think you could do a lot to kind of, make it seem like you're a good healer. I think that's between this and maybe Cinderbrew, those are the keys in which you feel like you might have the most impact. Well, a lot of other keys this season aren't really that healer focused. But again, there you have it. That is how I timed a +14 Priory on my Preservation Evoker this season. If you're curious about my gear, my builds, or anything else, I'm going to leave a link to the run below, and as well as always, a link to my Discord and my Twitch, where you can feel free to ask me questions if you like. I've been trying to stream a little bit more regularly, but I have been playing other classes too. I've been having a blast on Brewmaster, Prez, VDH, and I think I'm going to start up either my Resto Druid or my Owl next, and kind of have some fun there. But with that in mind, thanks again for all your love, thanks for all the support. If there's anything I missed or anything you'd like to see, feel free to drop something in the comments.